She had been chosen, dressed, and delivered. She had also been waiting for this exact moment. The carriage slowed at the end of a gravel drive that curved through 200 yards of manicured elm. Elowen Thackeray sat with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her breath steady, and she looked at Hartfield Park the way a woman looks at a lock she has already found the key to, quietly, without hurry. The gown she wore was ivory muslin, fine and soft, and entirely not hers. The Duchess had sent it 3 weeks ago with a note that read, "For the journey, something suitable." As if Elowen's own wardrobe were a problem to be corrected before she arrived, as if the first act of control needed to begin before the carriage even departed. Elowen had worn it. She had buttoned every button. She had let the lady's maid, the Duchess, pin her blonde hair into a braided crown that made her look, she knew, like a painting of someone's idea of a bride. Agreeable, ornamental, unlikely to cause difficulty. What the Duchess didn't know, what nobody standing on the steps of Hartfield Park could have guessed from the picture Elowen made, stepping down from the carriage, was that the trunk strapped to the back of the coach contained, beneath 3 folded day dresses and a prayer book, a sealed packet of documents that would end every arrangement the Duchess of Aldworth had ever made. Elowen's shoes met gravel. She looked up. Hartfield Park was the kind of house that had been designed to make visitors feel small, and it succeeded. 3 stories of honey-coloured stone, a columned portico wide enough for 6 men to walk abreast, and windows that caught the late afternoon sun and threw it back like a challenge. The gardens on either side were ruthlessly maintained, every hedge trimmed to geometric precision, every gravel path raked to an evenness that suggested someone was paid to do nothing else. It was beautiful. It was also a performance. Elowen recognized it the way the daughter of a theatre manager recognizes a painted backdrop. The front was immaculate. She was already wondering about the rooms no one was meant to see. The Duchess stood at the top of the steps. She was a tall woman, narrowly built, with dark hair threaded with grey and pulled into a style that required effort to appear effortless. Her gown was plum brocade, richly embroidered at the cuffs and collar with gold thread, and she wore gold earrings that caught the light when she moved her head. Her posture was the kind that other women's posture was measured against. Everything about her said order, control, the absolute assurance that things would proceed exactly as she had designed them. Miss Thackeray. The Duchess descended 2 steps, which was precisely enough to convey welcome without conceding height. "How well you look. The gown suits you." "Your Grace," Elowen curtsied, "you chose it beautifully." The Duchess smiled. It was a smile of satisfaction, the kind a woman gives when a parcel arrives, and the contents match the order. She took Elowen's hands briefly, studied her face with the efficient assessment of someone checking a horse's teeth, and found whatever she was looking for. "Come, you must be tired. Mrs. Norbury will show you to your rooms." She turned toward the door and added, almost as an afterthought, "My son will join us for dinner." The way she said it, "my son," without using his name or title, told Elowen everything she needed to know about who the Duchess believed owned this arrangement. Mrs. Norbury was a broad woman with a careful face, the kind of housekeeper who had learned long ago that the safest expression in a house like this was pleasant neutrality. She led Elowen up a wide staircase, down a corridor lined with portraits of Aldworth ancestors, and into a guest room that was handsome and impersonal, and situated, Elowen noticed, directly across the hall from the Duchess's own apartments, close enough to hear a door open in the night. "Will you need anything before dinner, miss?" Mrs. Norbury asked. "Only to unpack, thank you." The housekeeper paused at the door. Her eyes moved briefly to Elowen's face, and something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, exactly. Recognition. The look of a woman who has seen many young ladies arrive at this house and knows the difference between one who has been warned and one who has not. Dinner is at 8, miss. The Duke prefers punctuality. Which Duke? Elowen asked, and the question was mild enough to pass for confusion. Mrs. Norbury's mouth moved. It was not a smile, but it was adjacent to one. Both, miss. She closed the door. Elowen stood alone in the room for 10 counted breaths. Then she went to her trunk, lifted the day dresses, moved the prayer book, and found the sealed packet where she had placed it, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with cord. She pressed her palm flat against it. The paper was still crisp. The seal was intact. Her mother's handwriting on the outer fold read, "For when the time is right." She put it back. She closed the trunk. She dressed for dinner. The Duke of Aldworth entered the dining room, the way a man enters a room he has stopped caring about. Without ceremony, without greeting, and 6 minutes late. He was tall and lean, with black hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if anything about it had been warm. His eyes were blue, the particular shade of blue that in novels is called piercing, and in life simply means the person behind them is paying close attention and would prefer you didn't notice. He wore a charcoal wool tailcoat over a dove-grey waistcoat and black breeches, and everything about his clothing was correct, and nothing about it was chosen with pleasure. Jasper Aldworth sat at the head of his own table, the way a man sits in a room where the furniture was selected by someone else. He had not chosen the candelabra. He had not chosen the menu. He had not chosen the woman sitting opposite him, in ivory muslin, with her hands in her lap and her eyes on his face, with an attention that he found, immediately and unreasonably, unsettling. Miss Thackeray. He inclined his head. Your Grace. Silence. The kind that is not empty, but full, packed tight with all the things that two people who have been arranged to share a life have not yet decided to say to each other. The Duchess filled it. She filled everything. Jasper, Miss Thackeray plays the pianoforte. Quite well, I am told. Perhaps after dinner she might favour us. I am sure Miss Thackeray has preferences of her own about how she spends her evenings, Jasper said, and the sentence was pointed at his mother without looking at her. I do, Elowen said. I prefer music to silence, though I find both useful, depending on the company. Jasper looked at her. It was the first time he had looked at her directly, and what Elowen saw in his expression was not coldness. It was something more complicated, the wariness of a man who has been managed his entire life and has learned to treat every new person in his household as another instrument of his mother's will. She understood that look. She had been prepared for it. Useful, he repeated. Silence tells you what people are thinking, Elowen said. Music tells you what they're feeling. Both are informative. Something moved behind his eyes. Not softness, interest, the flicker of a man who had expected pleasantries and received instead an observation. The Duchess watched this exchange the way a chess player watches the opening moves of a game she has already planned to win. She smiled. The first 3 days at Hartfield passed in the particular tempo of a household preparing for a wedding that only one person had wanted. The Duchess organized. She sent for fabric. She consulted with the vicar about readings. She arranged flowers in the chapel, choosing each stem with the precision of someone building an argument. The wedding was in 12 days, and every hour between now and then had been allocated. Elowen let herself be directed. She tried on a veil. She approved a menu she had not selected. She sat for a fitting with a seamstress who measured her waist and her patience in equal proportions, and in the hours that were not claimed, she watched. She watched the Duchess's correspondence, the letters that arrived each morning on heavy cream paper sealed with the crest of a Lord Kenmore, the Duchess's brother. She watched the steward, a nervous young man named Pelham, carry ledgers in and out of the Duchess's private study with the careful step of someone transporting something he was not allowed to open. She watched the grounds, the tenant cottages visible from her window, and noticed that 3 of them stood empty with their windows dark and their kitchen gardens gone to seed. She was patient. She was very, very patient. On the 4th morning, she found the music room. It was at the far end of the east wing, a room that had clearly once been loved and had since been neglected. The pianoforte was a beautiful instrument, rosewood with brass fittings, but it was badly out of tune, and there was a thin layer of dust on the keys. The window looked out over a walled garden that had gone half wild, roses climbing over an arbour that no one had pruned in at least 2 seasons. Elowen sat down. She opened the lid. She played. She played the way she always played, which was without affectation and with the kind of technical command that cannot be faked. The pianoforte's tuning was imperfect, and she adjusted her touch to accommodate it, drawing from the instrument something warmer and more honest than its condition deserved. She played a piece by Clementi, then one by Field, and then she played something of her own, a melody she had composed during the weeks of waiting before the carriage came, a piece that sounded, if you were listening carefully, like a question asked in a language the listener almost understood. Mrs. Norbury appeared in the doorway with a cloth and a bottle of lemon oil. "No one has played that instrument in 3 years," she said. "That seems a waste." "Many things in this house are wasted, miss." Mrs. Norbury set the cloth on the window-sill. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. What Elowen didn't know, because the door to the adjacent study was closed and its occupant had not announced himself, was that Jasper had heard every note. He had been working at his desk when the music began, and he had stopped. He had put down his pen. He had sat with his hands flat on the desk and listened to a woman he had not chosen and did not want play his mother's pianoforte with a fluency that made the dusty, forgotten room sound like somewhere worth being. He did not go to the door. He did not introduce himself, but he did not pick up his pen again for a very long time. The pattern repeated. Each morning Elowen played, and each morning Jasper listened from behind a closed door. By the 6th day, the door was open 3 inches. By the 8th, he was standing in it. "You play well," he said, and the admission cost him something. Elowen looked up from the keys. "Your mother told you I did." "My mother tells me many things. Most of them are strategies rather than observations." "And which was this?" "Both, I suspect." He entered the room. He moved the way tall men move in spaces that were designed for women, with a consciousness of his own dimensions that made him seem, paradoxically, more contained than large. He stood by the window and looked at the overgrown garden. "She chose you because you are capable and quiet and unlikely, in her estimation, to resist being managed. She told me this. She used the word suitable, which is my mother's word for a person whose will can be folded small enough to fit inside her plans." Elowen's fingers rested on the keys. She didn't play. She did not look away from him. "And what do you think?" she asked. "I think," Jasper said, still looking at the garden, "that my mother has made a mistake she does not yet recognize, and I am not sure whether to be relieved or concerned." "Why concerned?" He turned from the window. His blue eyes were steady and unguarded, in a way they had not been at dinner, and Elowen understood that she was seeing something that the Duchess didn't see. Not vulnerability, exactly. Exhaustion. The particular fatigue of a man who has spent his adult life being the fixed point around which someone else's ambitions revolve. "Because I am beginning to suspect that you are not what she ordered," he said. "And in this house, things that deviate from my mother's orders tend to be corrected. I am not easily corrected, Your Grace." "No," he said. "I am beginning to see that." He left, but the door to the study stayed open after that. On the 9th day, Elowen found the ledgers. She had not been looking for them. She had been looking for sheet music in the cabinet beside the pianoforte, a cabinet that also contained, she discovered, a drawer that did not match the others. It was deeper than the rest, and contained, beneath a stack of old playbills, a bound leather notebook with no title on the spine, and a clasp that had been forced and reclosed with a twist of wire. Elowen opened it. The handwriting inside was small and precise, the hand of someone accustomed to recording figures. It was a private account, a shadow ledger that tracked transactions not recorded in the household books. Land sales, 17 of them over 4 years, everyone to the same buyer, Lord Kenmore. Every sale was below market value by a margin so consistent it could not be accidental. Beside each entry, a notation in a different hand, the Duchess's hand. Elowen recognized it from the note that had accompanied the ivory gown, initialing approval. The most recent entry was dated 8 months ago. The buyer was Lord Kenmore. The parcel was a stretch of tenant farmland on the estate's eastern boundary. The sale price was less than half its assessed value, and in the margin, in the Duchess's hand, a single note. J.A. signature applied. J.A. Jasper Aldworth. Applied. Not given. Applied. Elowen sat with the ledger in her lap and felt something settle inside her chest. It was not surprise. Her mother had told her what the Duchess was. Her mother's own documents, the ones wrapped in oilcloth in Elowen's trunk, covered 5 of these transactions from the years when her mother had served as the Duchess's companion and personal secretary, before she was dismissed for asking the kind of questions that a woman in her position was not meant to ask. But the ledger was worse than what her mother had documented. 5 sales had become 17. Forged signatures had become routine. The Duchess was not merely enriching her brother. She was dismantling the estate itself, selling it piece by piece to a man who would owe her everything, leaving her son with a title and a house and nothing underneath it. Elowen closed the ledger. She put it back in the cabinet. She closed the drawer. Then she went to her room, opened her trunk, and sat beside the sealed packet for a long time, her hand resting on the oilcloth, thinking about a man who stood in doorways listening to music he had not asked for and could not seem to walk away from. She had come to Hartfield to put documents in the Duke's hands and leave. That had been the plan. Give him the truth. Let him deal with his mother and walk away before the wedding could trap her in a family whose foundations were rot. But the man she had met was not the man she had expected. The Duchess's son was supposed to be complicit or oblivious, a product of his mother's making, shaped to her specifications. He was neither. He was tired and sharp and honest in the moments when he forgot to be guarded, and he looked at the overgrown garden with the expression of a man who knew exactly what neglect looked like and lacked the authority to repair it. Elowen was not a woman who changed plans easily, but she was a woman who recognized when a plan needed to accommodate a complication that was not a complication at all, but a person. The Duchess held a dinner on the 10th evening for Lord Kenmore and his wife, who had arrived that afternoon in a carriage that was too large and too new for a man whose estate, by rights, should not have afforded it. Kenmore was a soft man with a red face and the expansive confidence of someone who has never been told no, by anyone who mattered. His wife was thin and silent and wore a great deal of gold. They sat at the Duchess's table and ate the Duchess's food and spoke about the wedding as if it were a business merger, which Elowen supposed it was. "A fine match," Kenmore said, raising his glass toward Elowen. "My sister has an eye for these things." "Your sister has an eye for many things," Elowen said, and her voice was warm and her smile was pleasant, and the sentence meant exactly what it said, and nothing more and nothing less. Jasper, at the head of the table, watched her. He had been watching her more often in recent days, not with the distant assessment of their first dinner, but with something closer to attention, the specific, focused attention of a man who has realized that the person across from him is solving a problem he cannot see and doing it in plain sight. After dinner, the Duchess asked Elowen to play. She played. She chose a sonata that began sweetly and built to something complicated and fierce, and when she finished, the room was quiet in the way that a room is quiet when the people in it have been told something they were not expecting. Kenmore applauded too loudly. The Duchess smiled. Jasper said nothing. Later that night, Elowen heard a knock at her door. She opened it and found Mrs. Norbury standing in the corridor with a candle and an expression that had abandoned pleasant neutrality entirely. "Miss," she said, "forgive me, but there is something you ought to see before this wedding goes any further." She led Elowen down the servants' stair to the housekeeper's sitting room, a small warm space that smelled of beeswax and tea. On the table was a stack of papers, household accounts that Mrs. Norbury had kept privately for years, a parallel record of expenditures that did not match the official books. "I have served this family for 22 years, Mrs. Norbury said. "I have watched Her Grace sell this estate out from under her own son, and I have said nothing because saying something in this house has consequences. But you are about to marry into it, miss, and you should know what you are marrying into." Elowen looked at the papers. They confirmed everything. They were, in fact, more damning than the ledger in the music-room cabinet, because they showed the human cost. Repairs deferred, staff wages reduced, tenant petitions unanswered, the slow, systematic starvation of a household to feed a fraud. "Mrs. Norbury," Elowen said. "I know." The housekeeper stared at her. Elowen told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. That her mother had been the Duchess's secretary, that she had been dismissed for asking questions, that Elowen had come to Hartfield carrying proof. "You came knowing," Mrs. Norbury said. "I came because of it." "And the wedding?" "There will be no wedding," Elowen said. "Not the one she planned." Mrs. Norbury sat down. She sat the way a woman sits when something she has carried for a long time is finally set on a table in front of her, and she can see, for the first time, that it might be possible to put it down. "What do you need?" she asked. "One more day," Elowen said, "and an hour alone with the Duke." She found him in the library at midnight, 2 nights before the wedding. The library at Hartfield was the one room in the house that felt genuinely inhabited. Books were pulled from shelves and stacked on tables. A map of the estate was spread across the desk with pencil marks on the boundaries, the careful notations of a man who was trying to understand something that kept changing under his feet. A fire burned low in the grate. Jasper was standing at the window, looking at nothing. He turned when she entered. "Miss Thackeray?" "Elowen," she said, "if you are going to hear what I have come to say, you should use my name." He looked at her. The firelight moved across his face, and in the shifting light she could see what the careful daytime composure kept hidden. The tension in his jaw, the lines around his eyes, the particular stillness of a man who has been bracing for something without knowing what it is. "Elowen," he said. "What is it?" She set the sealed packet on the desk. She set the ledger from the music-room cabinet beside it. She set Mrs. Norbury's household accounts beside both. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She told him. She told him about her mother, who had served as his mother's companion and secretary for 7 years before being dismissed without reference for questioning an entry in the estate accounts. She told him about the documents her mother had copied before she was sent away, contracts of sale, letters of instruction to Lord Kenmore's solicitor, drafts of signatures that were not the Duke's own hand. She told him about the ledger she had found in the music room, the 17 sales, the forged initials. She told him about Mrs. Norbury's records, the years of deferred repairs and reduced wages and unanswered petitions. She told him everything. She did it calmly. She did it without editorializing or softening. She laid each document on the desk and let him read it, and when he looked up from one, she handed him the next, and she did not fill the silences between because the silences were his, and he needed them. When she finished, Jasper Aldworth sat at his own desk in his own library, surrounded by the evidence of his mother's systematic betrayal, and said nothing for a long time. He sat with his hands flat on the desk, the same way he had sat when he first heard her play, and his breathing was steady, and his face was very still. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since before the carriage came. You came here knowing what she was." "I came here to put this in your hands. I was not certain, when I arrived, whether you were part of it, whether you knew and allowed it, or whether she had kept you blind. I needed to see you before I decided what to do." "And what did you decide?" Elowen met his eyes. "That you are not part of it, that you deserve to know, and that if I had given these documents to a solicitor instead of bringing them here myself, the scandal would have destroyed you along with her, and you do not deserve that either." Jasper looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a lamp in a dark room, not with romance, not yet, but with the raw, unguarded recognition that someone has brought light into a space he had grown accustomed to navigating blind. "My mother chose you," he said. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him. "She chose you specifically. She chose me because my mother was the one person alive who could expose her. She wanted me close. She wanted me grateful, dependent, married to her son, and therefore unable to act against the family without destroying myself. And instead I am sitting in your library at midnight, giving you the means to take your own estate back." Jasper stood. He moved to the fireplace and placed both hands on the mantel and stood there, head bowed, for a count of 20. Elowen counted. She counted because she was the kind of woman who measured things precisely, and because she wanted to know how long it took him to find his balance. 20 seconds. He raised his head. "Tomorrow," he said. "Before breakfast. I will send for my own solicitor. Not Pelham. Someone from London. Someone my mother has not appointed." "Mr. Haldane," Elowen said. "In Chancery Lane. He handled my mother's affairs after the dismissal. He is familiar with the documents, and he is not afraid of your mother." Jasper looked at her across the room. "You had a solicitor prepared." "I had everything prepared, Your Grace. The only thing I was not prepared for was you." She meant it. She meant it in the way that a woman who has spent weeks building a careful plan means it when she admits that the plan did not account for the possibility that the man at its center would turn out to be someone she did not want to leave. Jasper crossed the room. He stopped a foot from her. He was taller than her by a head, and up close, in the firelight, she could see the pulse in his throat, and the way his hands, which had been so still on the desk, were not still now. Elowen. Yes. The wedding my mother planned is over. Yes. Good. He lifted his hand and touched her jaw, lightly, with the backs of his fingers. It was not a gesture of possession. It was a question. She answered it by not stepping back. He kissed her. It was brief and careful, and it tasted like the end of something and the beginning of something else. And when he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers for 3 breaths before he straightened. Stay, he said. Not because she arranged it. Because I am asking. Ask me again, Elowen said, when this is finished. The Duchess was in her study the next morning, when the door opened and her son walked in, followed by Elowen, followed by a thin man in a black coat carrying a leather case. Mrs. Norbury stood in the corridor behind them and closed the door once they were inside. She did not enter. She did not need to. The Duchess looked at Jasper. She looked at Elowen. She looked at the thin man, and something in her expression shifted, a contraction around the eyes, the same flicker that Elowen had seen before, but deeper now, because the Duchess recognized Mr. Haldane. She recognized him the way a woman recognizes the face of a consequence she believed she had successfully avoided. Jasper, the Duchess said. What is this? Elowen set the documents on the desk, the sealed packet, the shadow ledger, Mrs. Norbury's accounts. Mr. Haldane opened his case and added to them a set of notarized copies, affidavits from 2 of the tenants whose lands had been sold, and a letter from a magistrate requesting a formal accounting of the Aldworth estate's transactions over the previous 5 years. The Duchess looked at the papers. She did not touch them. Her hands stayed folded in front of her, and for a long moment she was absolutely still, the way a woman is still when the structure she has built around herself begins to show its cracks, and she is deciding whether to repair or retreat. You brought this, the Duchess said to Elowen, and her voice was level and cold and carried the weight of a woman who is accustomed to making other people's decisions for them. You invited me to bring it, Elowen said. You brought me into this house because you believed you could contain me. You dressed me. You placed me across the hall from your rooms. You chose me because my mother was the only witness you could not silence, and you thought her daughter could be managed the way you manage everything else. She paused. Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. I am not manageable, Your Grace, and neither, I think, is your son. Not any more. The Duchess looked at Jasper. What she saw in his face was not anger. It was something worse than anger. It was the settled, clear-eyed expression of a man who has stopped asking for his mother's permission and started making his own decisions, and it was the expression of a man who had made this particular decision hours ago and was now simply informing her of the result. These transactions will be reversed, Jasper said. Kenmore will return the lands at the prices he paid, and the difference between those prices and the assessed values will be recovered from his accounts or yours. Pelham will be replaced. The household accounts will be audited by Mr. Haldane's office, and you will retire to the Dower House at Lyndhurst before the end of the month. You would not, the Duchess said. I have. He held her gaze. The papers are already signed. My signature, Mother. My actual signature. The Duchess sat down. She sat the way Elowen had seen Mrs. Norbury sit in the housekeeper's room, the involuntary collapse of a woman whose structure has been removed. But where Mrs. Norbury's collapse had been relief, the Duchess's was something else. It was the particular, airless silence of a woman who has controlled everything and is now being informed, calmly and without negotiation, that the game is over. She said nothing. The silence lasted, and did not break. Elowen and Jasper left the study together. Mr. Haldane stayed behind with his leather case and his notarized copies and the expressionless patience of a man who has sat across from more powerful adversaries than a duchess and prevailed. In the corridor, Jasper stopped. He stood with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, and for 10 seconds he was not the Duke of Aldworth. He was a man who had just cut the cord that had held him to a structure he had mistaken for support, and was learning, for the first time, what it felt like to carry his own weight. Elowen stood beside him. She did not touch him. She did not speak. She gave him the silence, and the silence was not empty. It was the kind of silence between two people who have done a difficult thing together, and are discovering, in the aftermath, that they are still standing. "You should have told me sooner," Jasper said. "You would not have believed me sooner," Elowen said. "You needed to see me first. You needed to know that what I brought was not an attack." He opened his eyes. He looked at her, and what was in his expression now was something that had not been there at their first dinner. It was not gratitude, which would have been simple, or admiration, which would have been easy. It was the specific, complicated recognition of a man who has been given a gift he did not know he needed by a woman he did not know he wanted, and who is only now beginning to understand the shape of both. "The wedding," he said, "is cancelled. Your mother's wedding was never going to happen regardless." "I know. I am not speaking about my mother's wedding." He pushed himself off the wall. He stood before her, and his hands were at his sides, and his posture was his own, not his mother's, not the family's, just his. "I'm speaking about a different question entirely." "Then ask it differently," Elowen said. "When the dust settles, when you are certain, when your name is on documents because you chose to sign them, and not because someone applied your hand without asking." He nodded. It was a small movement, precise and private, and it was a promise. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, Elowen Thackeray walked up the gravel drive of Hartfield Park for the second time. The elms were turning. The light had the thin, golden quality of a season shifting, and the gravel under her shoes made the same sound it had made the first time, a sound she would always associate with the distance between the woman she had been and the woman she had become in the weeks between. She was not wearing ivory muslin. The gown was deep green velvet, cut simply, chosen by no one but herself. Her hair was down, loose over her shoulders in the way she wore it when she was not performing a role, and the prayer book was still in her trunk. But the sealed packet was not. The sealed packet was in Mr. Haldane's office in Chancery Lane, filed and witnessed and finished. Her mother stood beside her, a small woman with careful hands and grey eyes that matched her daughter's, walking the drive of a house she had been dismissed from 9 years ago with her back straight and her chin level and a look on her face that was not triumph but something quieter. Completion. The tenant cottages were occupied again. The empty windows had curtains. The kitchen gardens had been cleared and replanted, and from the nearest cottage came the sound of a child's voice and the smell of bread baking and the particular, unmistakable atmosphere of a house that is being lived in, rather than managed. Jasper was waiting at the top of the steps. Not the portico steps this time. He had come down to the bottom of the drive, to the place where the gravel met the road, and he was standing with his hands in his pockets and no tailcoat, and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow in a way that the Duchess would never have permitted, and that suited him, Elowen thought, better than any formal coat he had ever worn. He watched her walk toward him. He watched her the way he had listened to her music through a closed door, with the complete and undivided attention of a man who has decided, finally and irrevocably, that the thing he is witnessing is the thing he wants. Elowen, Jasper, you came back. You asked. Differently. His letter had arrived 2 weeks ago. It had been short. It had said, "Hartfield is mine now. It is honest now. I find that what I want most in an honest house is an honest woman. Come if you are willing. Stay if you choose. There is music in the East Wing that has not been played since you left, and a garden that is being restored, and a question I would like to ask you in person, in a room where no one has arranged the answer in advance." She had read it twice. She had packed her green velvet dress. She had brought her mother. Now she stood at the bottom of the drive, with autumn light in her hair, and the sound of gravel under her feet, and the particular, unshakable composure of a woman who has been chosen, dressed and delivered once before, and has arrived, this time, entirely on her own terms. Jasper took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, and it carried no conditions, and no fine print, and no forged signatures. "Will you stay?" he asked. Elowen looked at Hartfield Park, at the honey-coloured stone, and the trimmed hedges, and the windows that caught the autumn light and threw it back, not as a challenge now, but as a welcome. At the house that was learning, like its owner, to be something other than a performance. "I will stay," she said, "but I will choose my own gown." He laughed. It was a short sound, surprised out of him, the kind of laugh that a man who has not laughed in a long time makes when he is reminded that he can. Elowen heard it, and thought, "There. That is the sound of a door opening for the last time." She walked up the drive. The gravel crunched beneath her feet. Behind her, the road stretched back toward everything she had carried and delivered and set down. Ahead, the house waited, its doors open, its rooms filling with the particular light of a morning that belongs to no one's plan, but her own.